Now I'm really happy to welcome back a man who loves his hops and specializes in the props, Mr. Matt Landis from the Props and Hops podcast. You can follow Matt on Twitter at mlandis18. Matt, thanks so much for coming back on the show. What a huge game going on this weekend. How is life treating you?
Kiev, we're just days away from the Super Bowl. I'm talking to you about it. Life is good.
Life is good, man. I mean, being down here with the Super Bowl here, it's a little crazy with the Phoenix Open going on. You would not believe how many people go to this thing. It's the biggest golf event around in size. And I'm sure in alcohol, it certainly is the biggest as well. There's a lot of fun and lots of yelling that goes on to it. I went there a lot when I was younger. Now I'm kind of like, all right, I'll go. Give me if I find me a 10 pass or something like that. But there's plenty to do around this town right now. And the weather's looking nice, Matt.
Yeah, I remember growing up in San Diego, we used to get the Super Bowl from time to time, and just the energy of being in the host city. I mean, it's electric for me every year as we approach the Super Bowl, just from a betting standpoint. But there's something that does seem a bit more pure when you can actually take in the vibe of the whole in-person experience. So glad you're getting it, and hopefully LA gets back in the rotation before too long so I can partake in it once again.
I think with SoFi, it will be sooner than later, my friend. What a beautiful stadium that is. But speaking about beautiful things, we got to talk about beer because we both enjoy beer. Big reason that I love Props and Hops so much, as well as the great bets. So what kind of Super Bowl beers are you looking to get into this week?
Sure. So I've got 3 lined up as we speak. If you want, I can just set them up, knock them down. Actually, shortly before we came on board, was able to secure what I'll think of as the grand finale. But for starters, there is a beer by the name of Timbo Pils. Highland Park Brewery out here in Los Angeles makes it. And what I really like about Timbo, it's got the body of a Pilsner. It's really light and crushable, but they add some Mosaic and Citra hops. So you get those citrusy tropical notes. It's a bit fruitier, more flavorful than a standard Pilsner without the slightly heavier body of an IPA. So it's really nice because you get some of the best hop flavor, but it doesn't weigh you down in any way. So that's what we're starting with. Do you have anything lined up for a first or second quarter type of beer?
No, that's perfect. So first quarter, sometimes I'll go hard with an IPA, but I'll just ease into it sometimes. We're going to go with an easier wheat beer. And I don't remember if I mentioned this one, but it is orange season really down here in Arizona. And there's a great beer called Papago Orange Blossom. It is a wheat beer. I'm not the biggest fan of wheat beers, but this one is genuinely good. You know, all the oranges are ready for picking right now, and it has some great orange flavors. And when it's really cold, it's actually very delicious. And I'm not so sure you can count that as vitamin C, but I try to count it, Matt, when I'm pounding those down myself.
Yeah, well, speaking of vitamin C, I will say that the beer I will really ratchet the hops up with probably later on in the game is called Adios Ghost. It just dropped today. It's by Monkish, which is an IPA powerhouse out here in Southern California. And it's a triple IPA saturated with Citra hops. So again, vitamin C, that citrusy hop flavor pretty much delivers. And this is a really full-bodied, creamy, hazy IPA, but it's dangerously smooth. This one is about 10% ABV. And when we're talking double digits, it goes down way too easily. Glad I'll be watching Super Bowl from the comfort of my own home so that with some Adios Ghost in hand, nothing's at risk of getting too far out of control.
Yeah, that's three beers in one with the ABV on that thing. Holy cow. Yeah, no, you're kind of speaking my language there. That sounds absolutely delicious. And it sounds like a West Coast IPA
So
go ahead.
Adios is actually a hazy IPA. The Timbo Pils is closer
Okay.
to a West Coast IPA with a bit lighter of a body. And then, yeah, Adios is definitely on the hazy side.
Okay, so the New England IPAs, and that rolls me right into my next, which is a New England IPA from the Shop Beer Company right here in Arizona. Another Arizona local we're going with. It's called Church Music, and I texted you about that. It was actually delicious. It's 6.7 ABV. It's not too bad, but it's got made with some pineapple, and it's definitely got the Citra hops, and it's a New England IPA. Looks like an orange juice somewhat when you put it in a glass, right? But it is absolutely delicious. My buddy was here. We had a few of them. I have a few more saved for Super Bowl Sunday. So why don't you close us out with the, well, not necessarily the top beer, but your final beer you want to discuss.
Sure. So I love that we've been on the same page with some pretty citrus forward beers thus far. This will be a bit of a departure. If variety is the spice of life, I am going to wrap it up with a beer by the name of Blueberry Muffin. It's by Great Notion Brewing, which is based in Portland, but they've expanded their footprint recently across much of the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest. And as the name would imply, my head almost exploded the first time I ever smelled this beer years ago. It really does capture a fresh baked blueberry muffin with maybe a little bit of that like sugar sprinkled on top. Definitely more of the dessert type of beer. I wouldn't say it's sour, but it is tart. And especially with the aroma and the flavor to a slightly lesser extent, really lives up to that billing. I might have to get a blueberry muffin or something to pair with it as we're nearing the home stretch of the Super Bowl to round out, the Super Bowl hoppier side of things. This one, not one of the hoppier beers, but with that flavor, it's a nice departure, good change of pace from some more hop forward beers earlier on in the game.
Oh, there you go. You went hoppy to go through this one. That's my favorite. Love it. So to close us out, man, it's so funny. It's like when it comes to the Super Bowl, a lot of times I just, think of my old days drinking Miller Lite and stuff like that. So I have no problem doing, obviously the standard Miller Lights and all that fun stuff. But, with this one, I want to think of the first beer that I ever had, and it's actually Miller Genuine Draft. And I don't know why I've been jonesing for that lately, but I kind of remember when I was 15 years old and I had my first beer. And to be honest with you, I don't even know what it tastes like, but I do remember watching the Super Bowl when I was a kid with my dad. I mean, like teenager, right? And I was actually able to drink a couple of beers with him just to get that feeling nostalgia back. I Googled to make sure Miller still made it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna have a couple genuine drafts, and we'll get back to you to see if it still tastes like I remember. But back then, man, pretty much everything tasted good, Matt.
Oh, yeah. And I like to maintain the ethos that as much as I can nerd out on craft beer, there's a time and place for every beer. And Super Sunday can be a great one for some of those crowd pleasers. And I appreciate the honesty, not saying when you were 21, wink, wink, and you had your first beer. It seems like you got off to an early start. And among that kind of line of beers, it seemed like you got started with a pretty good one.
Yeah, Miller's definitely a popular. It was out of Milwaukee, being that I was from Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin. Definitely a very popular treat for us. We weren't Budweiser people. We were Miller people back in the day. So there you go. Well, let's move into the Super Bowl then. Super Bowl Sunday, 57 in Glendale, Arizona. Man, huge matchup. Kansas City Chiefs, Philadelphia Eagles. And the nice thing about this matchup, Matt, you've got one of the top four teams on each side here in this matchup. You don't got any flukes going on. We've had flukes in the past. Heck, we've had flukes win the Super Bowl, in my opinion, especially that one Giants team against Tom Brady that one year. But, what's nice, you have a pretty tight line. And just before we get into the props, anything quick on the side in the total?
I think that when we get to this stage, Super Bowl full game spread in total, a market that's been out for more than a week at this point, and it's about the most efficient we'll see all year when it comes to spreads and totals. No bets for me at the current numbers. I would lean Kansas City's way on the spread if I were forced to make a play, and that's just because there are so many pros and cons you can make for both of these teams. I get why it's such a narrow point spread, but for almost the entire season, most of the respected power ratings I saw, if not all of them, had Kansas City as the better team, and not by a significant margin near the end of the season once we knew the Eagles were for real, but still Kansas City a clear better team. I know the Eagles have been really dominant in the playoffs. I know the Chiefs had a rash of injuries, especially in the AFC Championship game beyond just Mahomes. But I feel like the Eagles being favored might be reading too much into the Chiefs injury situation. And so far, every indication I've gotten is that Kansas City not going to be 100%, but not going to be too far short of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if, as we get closer to kickoff, we see a little bit of Kansas City money if this number does move. Therefore, if I'm looking to bet the Chiefs, I'd probably do it sooner rather than later. On the flip side, if you're out there looking to bet the Eagles, I totally understand a lot of valid reasons why that could be the case. But I might just sit back and wait because you might be able to get a better number come kickoff.
Yeah, maybe so. To be honest with you, +3 on either side would be value.
Oh, for sure.
It's just, I like the Eagles early, and I expected a bigger line move due to the injuries, but it looks like everybody's playing but Hardman. I still think some of these guys are injured, and if my perfect algorithmic number comes up to the Eagles minus 0.5. Well, 0.5 doesn't happen in the Super Bowl. 1 rarely happens in NFL games, and 3 is pretty common. So I don't have a problem I was thinking buyback possibly when I had that early bet, but I still can roll with it here because I have the healthier team. And I guess from the offensive and defensive side of the ball, you're looking at a top 4 or 5 team. The Chiefs are a little bit more hurt on defense, yet they do have Mahomes as the quarterback. But you know what's interesting about being at such a tight line? It means that you can really kind of theorize how you want to put your props together. It's you want to put it maybe where you're not going to get destroyed on one side, right? Like if you think there's a big spread, maybe you favor one side, maybe and you agree with that spread, then you go low on the other. I'm going to probably adjust my portfolio, Matt, of situations where either side can win and I can still win all of my prop bets or most of them to make a profit. Does that sound like a sound strategy to you?
I think it sounds really prudent because there's one train of thought where before you bet all your props, handicap how you see the game going and bet according to that narrative. And especially as I touched on earlier, with a line being this efficient, I think there's maybe a lot of hubris involved in thinking you can forecast this game script better than a market that's telling us, the Eagles a very slight favorite, probably a pretty close game, but no surprise if either team wins. So I think that there's a way to be, much more resilient with a prop betting portfolio that maybe has a fair mix of overs and unders for key players on both teams. It's just about trying to find value, time the market properly. We can touch more on that later if you'd like, but not so much adhering to a game script that either one of us individually foresees playing out on Super Sunday, and instead just trying to find value in the numbers themselves and not marry them to any one outcome in this game.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think in a game like this, not being married to necessary out to either Kansas City winning or the outcome of Philadelphia winning could be proper. But I did favor tight ends and running backs because that's how I believe this game's going to shape up. I'm not a big believer in the receivers on the Chiefs. Well, for one, they're banged up and they're going to play, but do you know really that Tony's ankle is all that good? Do you really know Juju Smith-Schuster is completely healthy? And the numbers kind of come up and show that. But at the same time, Jalen Hurts, I'm not 100% his shoulder's okay either. I think they've had a very easy path on the Eagles side, and that's what everybody's talking about. But, they beat teams in many different ways on the ground and through tight ends like Dallas Goedert. So I'm kind of shaping my portfolio around heavier on the tight ends, heavier on the running backs, and a little bit lower on the receivers, where I might be waiting till the last minute to take some of those unders if I don't like the number on the receiving yards, which they're very low right now in the Chiefs. I might just go receptions, Matt. So we're going to take a look at it like that. So this means basically the prop bets I made, there's still plenty more to come, before the Super Bowl itself. But I'm going to start with one that I do like, Matt, and that is the second half to outscore the first half. And I laid minus 120 on this on DraftKings. I think this is a prop I play every single year, and I think most of the time it hits.
Yeah, that's one that I have also played every year in memory. I haven't played that one yet this year. I'm not sure I will, just because the Eagles seem to be so good in their opening drives. And also, for whatever reason, statistically, their second quarters have been off the charts good. And maybe there's plenty of noise there. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that definitely matters and it means you're doomed with this bet. I'm just wondering if it's, some degree of a chance that there's something to the Eagles being better in the first half. Again, if this is a competitive game, the Eagles have had a lot of blowouts in second halves. If they're forced to keep their foot on the throttle, then we could see the second half outscore the first half, as we have in many Super Bowls. But beyond the Eagles specifically, Kansas City also seems to be so good early on, not to overplay the Andy Reid off a bye narrative as far as this whole game is concerned, but specifically early on scripted plays. I think the Chiefs can get really creative and maybe catch the Eagles off guard a time or two. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bit more scoring early on in the Super Bowl, just given the makeup of these two teams. And that said, I think that we'll see a lot of efficiency across both offenses. To your point about looking at running backs and tight ends, I'm not sure that we'll see much explosiveness in this game. So just because both teams could be efficient, it doesn't guarantee that we're going to see a ton of fireworks in the first half. We might see some, plays of the, double-digit play drives, maybe 7, 8, 9 minutes. So I've just been so torn on this one because I almost always play it. In this specific matchup, if I'm not getting a bit more of a discount on the price than I am in most years, it's kept me on the sidelines to this point.
So that makes sense. And the one thing that I'm okay about with my Eagles bet is everything you just said right there. If the Eagles start big, the Chiefs are a comeback team. We know this. That's what Mahomes does. I will hedge back on my play anyway and try to middle. And that's kind of what I think could happen. So definitely not a bad idea if you really think the Eagles could power the first and second quarters. But I would still think it would take a blowout for the second half to not score more, especially with some of the fireworks we see in the fourth quarters of some Super Bowls. I laid minus 120. I'm pretty okay with it. But another play that I did was first score field goal. And I did, being that it's better than plus 200 on the blended odds, I did half of it for the home team plus 450, half of it for the away team at plus 390. I believe the Eagles are the home team, if I'm not mistaken. And I split it up into that. You blend those odds together, it's a little over 2 plus 215 ish. So my thoughts on this is, first of all, the correct number on this is around 160, 170. I did the math on this before. And secondly, this is the Super Bowl. They do not want to throw a pick at the beginning of this game and completely screw themselves over. I think it's going to tighten up when it comes to the red zone. People will be tightening up. It's such a big spot. It's usually a field goal kicker I see, and this has hit for me many times, Matt.
Yeah, I can't bet the other way on that one. This is another wager I haven't gotten down on yet to fully align with you. I think that you're shrewd in calling out that this prop is priced on a lot of what we see in the regular season, where more often than not, the touchdown is the first scoring method. And in this matchup, I would feel very confident if I knew that Kansas City were getting the ball first, that's a good look. But with the Eagles, the way that Nick Sirianni manages a game and will go for it on fourth down, I mean, we saw it in the NFC Championship game, the Eagles' opening drive. For most teams, 4th and 3 at the opposing 35-yard line, you're probably attempting a 53-yard field goal, and NFL kickers these days make most of those. So this prop would have gotten home in the NFC title game, but Sirianni goes for it. Catch or no catch by Devontae Smith. The Eagles got rewarded for it and pounded in a touchdown very shortly thereafter. So again, as I think about this specific matchup, some props that might be annual staples are really backed up by a macro level perspective on what we see across the league. I'm just trying to get a better feel for these teams, and especially the Eagles, the way they play. I think it's so analytically sound, and I'm glad that they've been rewarded by that, getting to the Super Bowl. I'm just not sure what that might mean for some props that are usually pretty easy to pin down based on math from a historical standpoint, based on a lot of new things the Eagles are doing differently.
That's true. The Eagles are very powerful. They could possibly score a touchdown on the first drive if they, lose the coin flip and then Kansas City defers, which we have two very deferring teams. So speaking of that, do you have any beginning of the game props, whether it be, obviously you said no to the first score, but, possibly a punt situation, maybe first score touchdown or anything like that? Or should we move into positional props?
I think we can go with the very beginning of the game and something that's been an annual staple for myself, and I'll give it another go this year. Opening kickoff, not to be a touchback. I'm seeing that pretty widely available at plus 140. And I like this not so much because I think it's any sort of a lock, but because I view it as about a coin toss. And if we're getting plus 140 on a 50-50-ish event, then that's enough to get me in play. And I think, talking about the math that you broke down for the first score method, I think the way this is priced heavily considers in the regular season, we see a lot more touchbacks. And I think a lot of that is in the name of player safety and all teams just wanting to keep their guys fresh, kicking the ball through the end zone, or if a guy receives it 1 yard deep, just taking a knee. And in the Super Bowl, I think field position trumps any notions of player safety. It's not uncommon to see high, short kickoffs, or if a team is receiving and the ball goes a couple yards into the end zone, to see them bring it out. Because I'd imagine if you're the deep return man for the opening kickoff of the Super Bowl, the adrenaline has got to be through the freaking roof. Mm-hmm. So considering that, maybe there's a bit of a narrative there in my head, but looking at these playoff runs for the Eagles and Chiefs, for both teams, their playoff kickoffs this season have not gone for touchbacks more than half the time. So again, ultimately, if this is about a toss-up to me, plus 140 either side I would play. If we had plus 140 on the yes for a touchback, I would take that as well. As the market is currently priced, I can't fault a look, and I myself am evolved at plus 140 on the no for the opening kickoff to be a touchback.
So let me ask you, if they did a fair catch on the 5 because they didn't want to run it, would that be called a touchback?
Can they do that in the NFL?
Well, I think when they just go like this, they just wave it off, right? And the ball just goes sailing past them. That would be considered a touchback.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
in college you can actually fair catch it, and maybe that's a touchback. I don't know if that rules
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
NFL.
I asked it wrong, I believe. Sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's totally cool. Yeah, that's certainly possible. I just feel like if somebody's got a chance to make a big return at the start of the Super Bowl, they might be looking to do it. Unless, I mean, there were explicit orders last year when the Super Bowl began. The return man kind of dug his heels in at the goal line and didn't take a step back. So if either team gives those kinds of demands this time around, this prop could be doomed. But I've seen a lot of kickoffs returned because they were received in the field of play, or even times where the ball is several yards deep in the end zone and somebody just wants to make a big play to start the game. And even if they don't get back to the 25, they might be much more willing than usual to take that chance.
Interesting. Yeah. I can't remember about the NFL now. So I'm going to research that if the fair catch is available. I know I get my college and NFL mixed up a lot, as I do both sides. So I'm going to have to research that. So what kind of positional props, maybe be quarterbacks, tight ends, running backs, or anything have you attacked so far this week?
Yeah, so far, building on your point about running backs and tight ends, I I don't want to encourage people betting these at current numbers just because they're marquee players, but conceptually, not to say I have Miles Sanders over 55 and a half and got a Travis Kelce receiving yards over earlier on. Um, those numbers don't seem bettable to me now, but as a teaching moment, if somebody is looking at those guys and hasn't bet yet, typically in a Super Bowl betting cycle for marquee players, it's best to look toward overs early. And if you're looking to the under, just wait. There's no rush. I know that I also got down on Mahomes passing yards over last week. And there are bettors who I highly respect, pro bettors who have gone on record as saying they're going to bet the Mahomes passing yards under, but they're just waiting because if over bettors could have taken him in the 280s or low 290s, now if we're in the mid 290s, a bit of a no man's land, this might creep up to 300 or more. And that's when people are going to come back the other way. So I think with positional props, there's a lot of timing to consider. As things stand right now, if somebody's missed the boat on Mahomes passing yards over, but they think, hey, he looked a lot better than I thought in the AFC title game, 2 more weeks of rest, I think he's going to be really effective in the Super Bowl. I think an alternative could be something like attempts, 38 and a half I've seen available, minus 110 to the over at a major regulated US book. So there are a lot of downstream ways to attack the same angles once a yardage prop gets blown up. For quarterbacks, looking at things like attempts or completions. For running backs, looking at rushing attempts or longest carry over under. For pass catchers, looking at receptions, longest reception over under. So just conceptually, those are the things that I'm starting to consider more of. Something that is available and not everywhere, but a lot of shops. I actually listened to the Dream Preview pod this morning and thought that a really good case was made for Jerick McKinnon longest rush under 8.5 yards because odds are he's not going to get a lot of work out of the backfield, especially with CEH getting activated. But I think that on passing downs, McKinnon might be in there to protect Mahomes. He's a great pass blocker. Or if they dump the ball off to him on a third and medium, fine, that doesn't affect his rushing output. So I think McKinnon, still a key player out of the backfield for Kansas City, but more so in the passing game than in the running game.
Yeah, I was looking at his totals. Pacheco has been used more lately in the passing game, which I found some interesting. So I actually like Pacheco's over, and I played it at 64 and a half rushing and receiving yards. And I wanted to put them together because I'm not sure which direction Kansas City's going to go in. But what I do know, Matt, is that these defenses tend to soften up a little bit against the running backs. And if you look, that's where the weakness is, if there's any really with the Eagles, was the rush opponent EPA per rush, as well as Kansas City. They give up around 4.5 rushing yards per attempt. So it's nothing major. It's not like they're a bad team. That would just possibly be a play. So I like the Pacheco over. And you said you like the McKinnon receiving?
Yeah, McKinnon longest rush under 8.5, where
Okay.
that's still available. Last I checked today, it wasn't available everywhere, but it wasn't like it was just available at one shop at a rogue number. So that's something that somebody with multiple outs may well be able to find. One more that's pretty widely available, and I'm waiting on, but I think it's bettable now. MVS receiving yards to the under. I'm seeing that posted anywhere from the mid 30s to some spots the high 30s. And I think a lot of this may be driven by recency bias in the AFC title game. 6 catches, 116 yards, a big touchdown, 8 targets. I think a lot of that, though, was driven by attrition with Juju and Kadarius Toney and Hardman going down. We know 2 of those 3 receivers will be back in the fold for Kansas City this weekend. And in MVS's previous 6 games, he hadn't touched 30 yards. I know he had a really good performance on a really big stage to get Kansas City to the Super Bowl. But I try to remind myself, with a guy like that, what have we seen more often from him than what have we seen most recently from him? So if that recency bias kicks in, is a lot more of the public gets down, I would bet, Kiev, that probably 90% plus of public money is not down on the Super Bowl yet, and that can really get books lopsided. So if people remember MVS's monster AFC title game, this one might trickle up. Even if it doesn't, I think 35.5 still bettable, but I'm optimistic that maybe somewhere we'll see something closer to 40 to then go ahead and get in play on MVS receiving yards under.
Yeah, I hope so, because last year I was waiting on unders and actually they went more under. And I think either the books wanted to gamble on, maybe they got a lot of public money overs and they just didn't want to move it, or there was just overwhelming number of sharp people just waiting on taking the unders, and they just kind of decided to take it during the week. I found it interesting that over the last year or two, some of those narratives didn't go through. I do believe the Mahomes one, though, will be moved up to 300 as well. And so I'm one of those people sitting out for that. But if it doesn't, I'm going to question it a little bit. And maybe I'll even like it a little bit more. So we'll see when I reassess that. But, just kind of my whole feeling on the way the game's going to go. I saw Kansas City defend very well with Spagnuolo as the defensive coordinator against Joe Burrow. They took out the 2 best receivers. Joe Burrow saw it a little bit and threw it to Hurst. But, Boyd was wide open, and then he got hurt. And then obviously with Irvin, they couldn't really get him the ball. There was no camaraderie there between Burrow and him. So I think that they might do that again to the Eagles and say, well, we're okay with you beating us on the inside because we're at least not allowing touchdowns. So I do feel that's going to be one of the ways of going. So I'm going to be taking A.J. Brown's under, and I think I'm going to take Devontae Smith's number of catches under. I just haven't done it quite yet. What about any first touchdown ones? Do you dabble with that? Those could be a negative EV when you get some of these numbers together.
Yeah, those can be a lot of fun. So if somebody's betting for entertainment value and they're not risking anything they can't afford to lose, I totally get it. Personally, I'm more of the mindset that almost every bet I make, I'm really trying pretty ruthlessly to see what's going to be the best for my bankroll in the long term. So I don't have anything down on that. But if you're looking for something early in the game to have a bit of a sweat through some of the first quarter, the prices on will there be a score in the first 6 minutes, that price is fluctuating from shop to shop. But another one that Steve Fezzik brought up on the pod this morning when I listened, I think he said that minus 140 was his fare for the no. And that kind of made the light bulb go off in my head, because I've had the thought for a couple of days. I spoke with NFL handicapper Cleve TA on Props and Hops yesterday, talking about, again, the notion of a game where the offenses can be pretty efficient, but not so explosive. So I think the punts under has been steamed. That's really hard to find a bettable number anymore. Mm-hmm. But something like no score in the first 6 minutes, the opening drive of the game could result in a score, and this one could still cash. So I don't know who's going to score the first touchdown, but if you're trying to find something of value and still have a bit of a sweat for a good chunk of the first quarter, that's the way I'd prefer to go. And I'll just trust Fezzik's math and say that if we're looking at no score in the first 6 minutes, minus 140 or better, I would definitely agree with that concept.
All right. No, good stuff. So as far as here's one that's going to be popular bet. And it's funny because it's Philadelphia. It's the Philly special. And some books are putting it out there. I requested some some bookmakers to make a yes or a no prop. I still haven't seen it. But one's interesting, and it came in at 22-1. It's a non-quarterback to have a passing TD at 22-1. I admit I threw a little bit on that because it doesn't have to be the Philly special, because both quarterbacks are a little bit hampered anyway. But it could be like a Kelsey or somebody else, with a trick play. And Andy Reid loves to draw that stuff up. So that's one of the little bit of more creative ones that I decided to jump into, Matt.
Yeah, and I'll admit that last year on this very prop, I lost betting the no. I found a 6-1 on the no for a non-quarterback to throw a touchdown pass. And again, I think often in the Super Bowl, vig and value can go hand in hand. For a lot of bettors, value is synonymous with a big plus number. Sometimes trying to think probabilistically, you can lay 6-1, 8-1 or more on a prop, and it feels really steep. But if the true probability is below that break-even percentage, you can find some spots where laying vig is very advantageous. Unfortunately, last year, I thought I had identified one of those spots, and then I think it was Joe Mixon throwing a touchdown pass pretty early on. So I do get that this is the Super Bowl. And again, that broke me out of my shell a bit of looking just at regular season numbers and trying to say, hey, all year long, this hasn't happened, or it's happened only once or twice in 272 games. Well, guess what? In the Super Bowl, that's when we're going to see teams usually unleash their max creativity. And especially with somebody like Andy Reid in this one, I don't think it's more likely than not to happen, but I cannot fault the notion at all of looking at that to happen if you're getting 22-1.
Yeah, 22-1 pretty much sold me on that one. It's okay at that price. Anything lower than like 12-1, I probably wouldn't have looked at it, but man, that's a little bit high from what I looked at it. Well, what other props that you could you give out that you made, if any? I don't know the size of your portfolio right now, but is there anything left that we haven't discussed?
Sure. A couple more that I can share. One, I will give a hat tip to Sharp Clark, who came on my show last Friday. I already had this high on the radar, and he definitely nudged me to get in play. The team to have the longest field goal, the Chiefs, and DraftKings has had this posted at even money. And I'll note that even money is a three-way market. So if there's no field goal in the game, or if somehow the longest field goal for both teams is a tie, then that Chiefs angle would lose. But a lot of other books offering this at a two-way market, Chiefs minus 115 to minus 120, where you get a push if there's no field goal or there's a tie for the longest field goal yardage between both teams. And what I like about this handicap is that something we touched on earlier, NFC Championship game, opening drive for Philadelphia, 4th and 3 at the 35. A lot of teams would kick a field goal. They go for it. I think Andy Reid almost assuredly kicks a field goal in that kind of spot. So this is the kind of edge where I think there could be 4th and shorts in field goal range. Philadelphia more inclined to go for it. Kansas City more inclined to attempt a field goal. Not a lock by any stretch, but if you can get, even money in a three-way market, I think it's probably closer to a 55 to 60% edge. So it's almost just like getting, more favorable odds where you only have to pay the price of a coin flip for something that should be slanted a bit more heavily in Kansas City's favor.
No, there you go. I love it, man. I bet that too at DraftKings at plus 105, probably like the second day it came out. I'm like, well, Butker, yeah, they're kicking the field goals long. Sirianni, he's going for it. That's the first thought that went through my head with that one. So I absolutely love that. There's a lot of interesting ones. Will there be an octopus, same player to score to TD, get the 2-point conversion? I actually personally think there will be a 2-point conversion attempt. I took the yes at plus 152 for an attempt, not necessarily a completion. They just need to attempt it. A lot of times you're down by 11, you get that touchdown. You need to get the two to get between three. So I didn't mind that one so much in the Super Bowl. But the last one I want to give out is Fletcher Cox. And unfortunately, DraftKings pulled it right after I bet it. But it's still out there in some other books, but not quite as good. I bet over 0.25 sacks at plus 260. And now it's 0.5 at so that's a push and a half sack at plus 200 in some offshores right now. You can shop around, but I like Fletcher Cox, and I think he's one of the reasons the Eagles have that best defensive line. He knows how to do the swim techniques and the rips and split double teams, and he's a great 3 technique and gets to the quarterback. I think Mahomes will be pushed up into the pocket with some of those great pass rushers as well. Somewhat might be a little bit hampered where a big nose tackle can actually catch him. All you need is a half a sack to go over it. So you just need to bump into the guy while Hargrave or somebody else is taking him down. So that's the defensive one I like as of right now.
And I'll go with one that might sound like a fade of both defenses, but isn't necessarily the case. The last one I can throw out here. Will a team score 3 unanswered times, excluding conversion? So we're talking 3 legitimate scores, a touchdown, field goal, or perhaps a safety, but probably not a safety. And I like the yes on this one. I've seen DraftKings hanging minus 175. That's about my price cutoff for this being a bettable number. But as we get closer to kickoff historically, it sounds like it would be pretty far-fetched in a game with such a tight point spread, and there's a nice plus number attached to the no. So I think we'll see a lot of public action on the no over the next couple of days, and this number might get even better than minus 175 on the yes. So bettable now, but I'm going to wait for perhaps an even better number between now and kickoff. And one of the subtle factors here, it sounds like, hey, we've got 2 really good offenses, a pretty high point total, a tight point spread. It could be back and forth. Well, that's all true. it doesn't necessarily require consecutive stops from the defense, because the way this gets home a lot is a team scores near the end of the first half and then coming out to start the second half. So there's a way to score 3 straight times where your defense only touches the field once. I think that's a hidden factor here that when we see this at minus 175 or better, has me really looking at the yes for a team to score 3 times in a row.
Very sharp, Matt, and that is always on the yes. And people get tempted from that plus money. No, the truth is it happens way more often than you think, especially when you're in the fourth quarter. Let's say you're up by maybe 17 points. You allow a field goal, you kind of allow another field goal. Maybe they do get that backdoor touchdown. There's just ways that you're in coast mode, you're punting the ball, you're trying to drain the clock, and the other team can inch back and blowouts and in those situations as well. So not only all the stuff you said about going from first half to second half, this happens quite often, and it happens more often than people think. So great one. And I will be waiting on that yes too. So thank you for reminding me of that one, Matt. Well, hey, man, we are out of time. Thank you for covering all these wonderful props. I'm sure people can tune into Props and Hops and get all these props that you made with some of your great guests. Where could our listeners and viewers get your great information and media?
Sure. So Props and Hops, wherever you get your podcasts, also available on YouTube. If you search Props and Hops, you'll find it there. For the latest info on anything else I'm sharing, on Twitter at mlandis18.
All right. Make sure you guys check out Matt. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. Best of luck in the Super Bowl. Make sure you enjoy all the props and all the beer.
Right back at you. Yes. Best of luck with both the props and the hops come Super Sunday.